Red dust stretched across the narrow road leading to the ranch. The evening sun bled into the horizon, turning the Arizona sky into a wound of fire and gold. Thomas Hale, a weathered cattleman with gray at his temples, pulled on the reins and stopped his weary horse. He took a deep breath of the dry desert air. Ahead of him lay the land he had traded his fortune for, a broken ranch on paper, a promise of a new beginning in his heart. After years of war and wandering, he longed for quiet, but what greeted him was no promise. It was a nightmare. In the middle of the yard stood a warped wooden frame, its beams weathered and half-rotten. From it hung 5 frail bodies, swaying in the hot wind. Not corpses, at least not yet, but 5 young Apache women, caught between life and death. Their legs twitched weakly, their necks bound by thick hemp ropes that bit deep into the skin, leaving angry purple welts. Harsh, ragged breaths rattled from their throats, faint as whispers lost in the desert air. Their wide, pain-filled eyes locked on Thomas, pleading for something no one else had given them: a chance. Thomas's rough, calloused hands trembled as he gripped the saddle horn. He had seen death before on battlefields, in lawless towns, in the quiet aftermath of raids. But this was different. Not the chaos of war, not the fury of men clashing, but a silent cruelty, measured and deliberate. The kind of act that branded people as less than human. The sinking sun painted everything in crimson: the brittle grass, the sagging fences, and the faces of the 5 who still clung desperately to life. He froze in his saddle, the weight of choice pressing down harder than any rifle he had ever carried. He thought of Cain, the man who had sold him this land at a price too good to believe. The hurried handshake, the ink rushed across the deed. Now Thomas understood why. Cain hadn't just sold him dirt and timber, he had sold him a noose. The rasp of a choked gasp pulled him back. One girl's body jerked violently. Her lips parted in a soundless cry. Instinct overrode hesitation. Thomas swung from the saddle, boots striking dust. His hand shot to the old knife at his belt, the steel flashing in the dying light. He rushed to the frame, eyes burning. With a single stroke, he cut the first rope. The body dropped hard into the dust. Thomas knelt instantly, sliding a hand beneath the girl's head, searching for breath, for a pulse. Her skin burned hot with fever, her breath weak, but alive. "Hold on. Don't give up," he muttered, voice low, unsure if he spoke to her or to himself. One rope, then another. His knife worked quickly, desperately, as each body crashed to the ground in a storm of red dust. He dragged them aside, checked their throats, pressed his ear to their lips. Some clung faintly to life. Some hovered close to death, but none were gone, not yet. Sweat stung his eyes, his chest heaving as though he were back on the battlefield. At last, the final rope snapped free. All 5 lay sprawled in the dirt before him, broken sparrows beaten by the wind. Thomas collapsed to his knees, chest pounding, his shirt clinging damp with sweat and dust. He looked up at the empty frame, its beams creaking in the wind like a gallows groaning for more. Then, from the cracked lips of one of the girls, came a whisper, faint but sharp as a blade. "Cain. He sold us. Left us here." The name struck Thomas like a bullet. Cain, the man who had smiled across the table, rushed him to sign, promised a bargain too good to last. Now the truth bared itself in the blood-red sunset. Thomas tightened his jaw, his fists curling. The moment the ropes were cut, his life had changed forever. He was no longer a man buying peace. He had stepped into another man's sins. The cabin smelled of old smoke and dry rot. Its walls leaned with age, its windows cracked, but it offered more shelter than the dust outside. Thomas dragged the women inside one by one, laying them on a torn mattress and blankets pulled from trunks long abandoned. The night air of the desert crept in through every crack, sharp and cold after the sun's blaze. He tore strips from his own shirt, binding raw welts on their necks, where the rope had bitten deep. He poured water from his canteen into their mouths, drop by careful drop. His rough hands, meant for rope and rifle, moved with a gentleness that surprised even him. Each shallow breath they drew felt like a battle won against death. Hours passed in silence, broken only by coughing and the creak of the timbers. At last, eyelids fluttered. The first to stir was the tallest of the 5, her eyes storm gray, glimmering with both fear and defiance. She swallowed hard, voice rasping. "My name. Sauter Redbird." Thomas gave a small nod. "You're alive. That's what matters." One after another, the others found their voices. Anna Greyfeather, her tone soft and hesitant, clutching her own arms as if ashamed to take up space. Rose Blackfox, sharp and angry even in her weakness, cursing between ragged breaths. Mary Whitecloud, gentle, whispering thanks though her lips bled. And Clara Nightstar, clever eyes darting around the room as if already looking for ways out of this nightmare. They were not monsters. They were daughters, sisters, human beings beaten and cast aside. Thomas offered them bread he had carried in his saddlebag. They ate slowly, every bite trembling through them like a stolen gift. For a while, no one spoke. The crackle of the oil lamp filled the silence. Then Sarah's voice broke through, raw and bitter. It was Kane, Samuel Kane. He owned this ranch. We worked his fields, built his fences, drove off raiders. We gave everything we had. But when the debt men came, he gave us instead. Said we were savages, not worth more than a rope. He sold the land cheap, left us here to hang. Her words cut Thomas to the bone. Kane's grin, that rushed bargain, the push of papers across the table, it all came back with cruel clarity. Thomas had thought he'd bought peace. Instead, he had bought Kane's sins, wrapped in rope and betrayal. Rose spat onto the dirt floor. "You didn't buy a ranch, cattleman. You bought our gallows." Thomas's jaw tightened, the truth settling heavy on his chest. He looked at the 5 faces before him, bruised, broken, but burning with life. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of choice pressing harder than a battlefield musket. He had saved them from the rope, but had he doomed them, and himself, to something worse? Outside, the wind rose, rattling the shutters. A sound carried with it distant, deliberate, the steady rhythm of hooves. Another followed, the flicker of torchlight glowing faint through the cracks of the door. The women's eyes went wide with terror. Thomas reached for the rifle leaning by the wall. His pulse steadied, as it always had before battle. Someone was coming. The knock wasn't a knock at all. It was a pounding, heavy and slow, shaking the rotten door against its rusted hinges. Outside, hooves stamped in the dirt, the sound carrying through the night air like the beat of war drums. The fire of torches bled orange across the cracks in the walls, shadows flickering like demons circling a coffin. Thomas rose from the chair where he had sat sharpening his knife. He lifted his Winchester from its place against the wall and glanced toward the 5 women. Their eyes were wide, every breath quick and shallow. Sarah's hand reached for a broken chair leg, clutching it like a club. Rose hissed, "They've come back." A voice boomed through the night, rough and soaked in cheap tobacco. "Thomas Hale, we know you're in there, and we know you've got those savages with you. Open the door before we burn that shack to the ground." The women stiffened at the word savages, the same word Kane had used to strip them of their humanity. Thomas steadied his breath, his face calm, though inside the old weight of war tightened across his chest. He walked to the door, unlatched the bar, and stepped out into the night. The moon cast silver over the yard, cold and unforgiving. 5 riders sat astride their horses in a line, their pistols hanging at their hips. At the center rode a man with a thick black beard and eyes like an animal that had learned to enjoy the hunt. He leaned forward in his saddle, a grin pulling at his scarred face. "Ezekiel Barnes," Thomas muttered under his breath. He'd heard the name whispered in Tucson, a man who collected debts with blood, who laughed at judges and shot lawmen dead in the street. Now here he was, sitting on Kane's sins like a vulture. "What do you want?" Thomas asked, his voice flat, steady. Zeke's grin widened. "What do I want?" "Kane's debt. He owed more than he had, promised to pay with this land. And with those 5 squaws he kept here to work it. But Kane's gone, and you're the one holding the bag, cattleman." Thomas's hand tightened on his rifle, but he kept it low, the barrel angled toward the dirt. "I bought this ranch with my own coin. I have a deed signed by the court in Tucson. Whatever crooked deal Kane made, it has nothing to do with me." The riders laughed, the sound ugly in the night. Zeke spat into the dust. "Court papers? Out here in Arizona, they don't mean a damn thing. The only law is whose gun speaks louder. You've got 7 days, Hale. 7 days to pay what Cain owed. Or get out, leave the land, leave the women, or we'll take them ourselves. He yanked the reins, and his horse reared, torchlight flashing across his sneer. Without another word, the gang wheeled their mounts and rode off into the desert night, red dust swirling in their wake. Thomas stood alone on the porch, moonlight carving deep lines into his face. The empty gallows loomed in the yard behind him, its beams groaning softly in the wind. His hand tightened unconsciously around the rifle grip. He had bought this land for peace, but once again war had found him. Inside, the women sat huddled together. Sarah looked up, her voice breaking. 7 days. They'll be back. Thomas closed the door, bolted it, and set the rifle down on the table. His eyes lingered on the flickering lamp, shadows dancing like ghosts. He knew she was right. 7 days. That was all the time they had. The first morning came harsh and unyielding, the desert sun rising like a blade of fire. Thomas rose before dawn, shoulders heavy from years of war and labor, yet the weight felt different now. He walked the yard where the gallows still stood, a grim reminder, and set to work as if the land itself demanded penance. The women joined him, one by one. Sarah Redbird was the first, tall and unbroken despite the bruises that ringed her neck. She picked up a broken fence post and drove it into the earth with a strength that surprised him. "If we're staying," she said simply, "we'll need more than prayers." Anna Greyfeather moved quietly, carrying water from the well. She kept her eyes low, words soft, but she worked until her arms trembled. When Thomas offered to take the bucket, she shook her head. "I can do it," she whispered. And for the first time he saw that beneath her shyness was a stubborn will. Rose Blackfox was fire from the start. She cursed at the stubborn mule, slammed boards into place with reckless force, and when the hammer slipped and bloodied her knuckles, she only spat on the dirt and laughed. "Better the land bleeds than us," she muttered. Mary Whitecloud was her opposite, moving with gentle care. She patched torn shirts, gathered herbs from the dry hills, and laid cool cloths on Thomas's brow when the desert heat pressed too hard. Her kindness was a balm none of them knew they had needed. And Clara Nightstar, youngest of the five, watched everything with sharp eyes. She spotted the weak points in the fence, pointed out where the irrigation ditch could be dug deeper, even sketched rough maps in the dirt with a stick. Her mind was quick, and when the others tired, her ideas kept them moving. Day after day, they worked. Sweat and dust became their language, silence their companion. By night, they sat around the oil lamp in the sagging cabin, breaking bread and sharing fragments of themselves. Sarah spoke of her father, a proud leader cut down in a raid. Anna confessed she still dreamt of her mother singing by the river. Rose admitted she once dreamed of running away to California, fists first. Mary prayed softly in Apache, words Thomas didn't know but felt deep in his bones. Clara laughed when she spoke of chasing wild horses as a child, her voice carrying a lightness none of them thought possible after the gallows. Thomas listened more than he spoke. He was a man of few words, yet each story stitched itself into him, a patchwork of trust. By the fourth night, he looked at the women not as burdens, nor as Cain's discarded debt, but as something unexpected, partners. On the sixth day, he found himself laughing for the first time in years. Rose had slipped and fallen into the ditch she was digging, cursing loud enough to wake the dead. Clara teased her. Anna tried not to smile, and even Sarah's stern mouth cracked. The sound startled Thomas. It had been so long since laughter felt real. But time was a rope tightening. Each sunrise brought the hoofbeats closer in his mind. By the seventh evening, the ranch bore signs of new life. Fences stood straight. The ditch held a thin line of water, and the house glowed faintly with smoke from the chimney. It was not much, but it was theirs. Thomas stood at the gate as the sun bled into the horizon. His rifle rested against his shoulder, his eyes on the distance. Behind him, the women waited, silent, shadows stretching long in the dying light. Then it came, the low, steady thunder of hooves on the desert floor. Dust rose far off, blotting out the last red of the sun. Lanterns swayed like fireflies in the darkness. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "They're here." Thomas adjusted his rifle, jaw set. 7 days had passed. The storm had arrived. The horizon burned red as the sun bled its last light into the desert. The dust cloud rose like a storm, a wall of hooves and iron coming straight for the ranch. Thomas stood at the broken gate, rifle steady in his hands. Behind him, the 5 Apache women waited in silence. Their faces were pale in the dying light, but their eyes burned like coals. The riders thundered closer, more than a dozen now. Zeke Barnes led them, his black beard glinting in the torchlight, his cruel grin stretched wide. He pulled his horse to a stop, raising his hand. The gang fanned out in a line, rifles gleaming, ropes swinging from their saddles. "Time's up, Hale." Zeke's voice carried over the dust. "The land's ours. And the women too. Step aside, or we'll trample you into the dirt." "Oh." Thomas didn't answer. His rifle stayed trained on the leader's chest. Behind him, Sarah gripped a pitchfork like a spear. Anna clutched a shotgun. Thomas had pressed into her hands. Rose hefted a hammer. Mary stood near the cabin doorway with a bucket of water ready for fire. And Clara held a small pistol, her hands trembling but steadying as she took aim. "You can turn back," Thomas called, voice calm, even. "But if you cross this fence, you'll find more than Cain left behind. You'll find me." For a moment, silence. Then Zeke barked a laugh. "An old soldier and 5 half-dead squaws think they can stand against us? Boys, let's show 'em." The first gunshot cracked like thunder. Thomas fired, the bullet striking the dirt inches from Zeke's horse. The animal reared, screaming, throwing dust into the air. The gang scattered, shouting, and suddenly the yard was alive with fire and smoke. Thomas moved with the precision of war, every shot deliberate, cold. He fired from behind the fence, reloaded without panic, and dropped a rider who dared too close. Years of battle had hardened his aim. His rifle barked like judgment. Sarah charged with a roar, driving her pitchfork into a rider who tried to swing a rope at her. The man toppled from his saddle, the dust swallowing him whole. Anna, shaking but fierce, pulled the shotgun's trigger. The blast tore through the night, scattering 2 riders back. Clara's pistol cracked, her small hand steady now, her shot grazing a man's arm and sending him howling into the dark. Rose was wild fury, swinging her hammer into the side of a horse, sending it crashing sideways, rider and all. Mary ran where the fire sparked, dousing flames before they could spread, her calm hands turning chaos into survival. The ranch yard erupted into a storm of smoke, gunfire, and screams. Horses reared, men cursed, bullets tore into wood. Thomas fought like the war had never ended, every muscle moving as if carved by years of blood and loss. The women fought beside him, no longer victims dangling from ropes, but warriors, fierce and alive. Then Zeke himself charged forward, pistol blazing. Thomas ducked behind the fence, wood splintering above his head. He rolled, raised his rifle, and fired. The shot missed Zeke but struck the lantern he carried. Fire exploded in the dust, flames licking across the dry grass. The yard lit in a hellish glow, fire spreading fast. Smoke burned Thomas's eyes as the gang pulled back, coughing and shouting. Zeke wheeled his horse, snarling through the flames. "This isn't over, Hale," he bellowed. 7 days were mercy. Next time, we bring hell." He and his riders vanished into the night, their hoofbeats fading into the desert. But the fire remained, snapping and roaring as it devoured the dry yard. Thomas and the women scrambled to contain it, beating the flames with blankets, tossing water where they could. When at last the blaze died down, the yard was blackened, the fence charred, the air thick with smoke. The ranch still stood, but barely. Thomas lowered his rifle, his chest heaving. The women gathered around him, their faces streaked with sweat and ash. In their eyes he saw no fear, only defiance. The battle was not finished. It had only begun. The ranch smelled of smoke and blood. The fire was out, but its scars remained blackened fence posts, charred earth, the bitter taste of ash clinging to every breath. The night had gone eerily still, as if the desert itself waited to see whether they would endure or fall. Thomas sat on the porch, rifle across his knees. His hands, scarred from old battles, trembled slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion. The 5 women moved quietly in the yard, tending to wounds and salvaging what little remained. The storm of riders had passed, but its shadow lingered heavy. Sarah Redbird knelt beside Rose, wrapping cloth around her bruised arm. "You swung that hammer like you were born with it," she muttered. And for the first time, Rose grinned through split lips. Anna fetched water, her face pale, eyes flicking nervously toward the horizon. Mary whispered prayers in Apache as she cleaned burns on Clara's hands. When the work was done, they gathered inside the cabin. The oil lamp flickered low, casting their faces in tired gold. Silence pressed down until Clara broke it, her voice thin but steady. "They'll come back. With more men, more fire." Thomas nodded. "They will." Anna's eyes filled with fear. "Then we should leave. Run into the hills. Find safety where their horses can't follow." Rose slammed her fist against the table. "Run? And let them take everything? Let them win?" She spat on the floor. "Better to die swinging than crawl like dogs." Mary's gentle voice cut through the fire. "And if we fight, more will die. Them, maybe us. Violence breeds violence. Haven't we seen enough?" Sarah leaned forward, her storm gray eyes locking on Thomas. "She's right about one thing: they'll come back. And when they do, we have a choice. Either we face them, or we end up with ropes around our necks again." She held his gaze, unflinching. "You've fought wars before, cattleman. You know what it takes." Thomas looked at her, the weight of her words dragging him into memories. He thought buried the screams of men in blue and gray, the smoke of cannons, the fields soaked in blood. He had sworn never to lead another fight. Yet here he was, rifle in hand, the lives of 5 women tied to his choice. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his voice came low, rough as gravel. "I bought this land to bury war, but war found me again. And if we run, it'll follow us. No, this time we hold the line. Not for Cain, not for the deed, for us." Sarah gave a single nod. Rose grinned through her bruises. Anna looked terrified but did not argue. Mary closed her eyes, whispering another prayer. Clara leaned forward, sketching lines in the dust on the table, her clever eyes alive. "If they come, we'll be ready. There are places to dig trenches, walls we can reinforce. We're not powerless." For the first time, Thomas allowed himself to look at them not as survivors, but as comrades. 5 women the world had cast aside, now standing at his side. Outside, a coyote howled across the desert. The sound carried long and low, an omen stretched thin under the stars. Thomas tightened his grip on the rifle. The battle was not over. The night itself seemed to whisper blood would return. The night fell red with dust. From the horizon rose the sound they had all dreaded, the low thunder of many hooves, steady as war drums. Lanterns swung in the dark, a crooked line of fire crawling across the desert floor. Thomas stood at the rebuilt gate, Winchester heavy in his hands. Behind him, the women moved into their places without a word. Sarah hefted a long spear she had carved from a fence post. Anna gripped her shotgun, lips pressed tight. Rose carried her hammer, blood still on the handle from last time. Mary clutched bandages and water, ready to tend the wounded. Clara crouched low with her pistol, eyes sharp as the stars above. The gang came into view, more than a dozen men this time. Zeke Barnes rode at the front, black beard glistening with torchlight, his sneer wide and cruel. His riders spread out like wolves circling prey. "Hail!" Zeke's voice tore through the night. "Your 7 days are gone. Step aside. The land is ours. The women are ours. Don't make us spill blood." Thomas lifted his rifle, barrel gleaming silver in the moonlight. "This land was bought with coin, but tonight it will be held with blood, if that's what you want." Zeke spat, laughing. "So be it." He raised his hand. The riders surged forward. The first shots rang out. Thomas squeezed the trigger, the blast echoing across the yard. A rider toppled from his horse, crashing into the dirt. Anna fired the shotgun. Its roar split the night, scattering 2 men back. Clara's pistol cracked sharp, her bullet grazing another's shoulder. Sarah roared, charging into the fray. A rider swung a rope at her, but she caught it, yanked hard, and tore the man clean off his saddle. She drove her spear down, dust swallowing the scream. Rose leapt onto a fence post, swung her hammer wide, and smashed it against a horse's flank, sending beast and rider tumbling. The ranch became a storm of fire and steel. Bullets tore into wood, Sparks flew as lanterns crashed. Horses screamed. Men cursed. Thomas moved like the soldier he once was, cold, precise, unshakable. He fired, reloaded, fired again, each shot dropping another man who dared too close. Mary darted through the chaos, pulling the wounded back, pressing cloth against bleeding wounds, her calm hands turning fear into survival. The women fought as if the gallows still hung above them, every strike a refusal to be strung up again. Clara spotted weak points, shouting where to fall back, where to strike. Sarah and Rose fought back to back, fierce as fire. Anna, though trembling, held the shotgun steady and blasted any who broke too near. The night roared with screams and gunfire. Dust and smoke filled the air, choking, blinding, but still they held. Then Zeke himself dismounted, stepping into the yard. Pistol in one hand, knife in the other, he stalked forward through the smoke. His eyes found Thomas across the battlefield, and his sneer stretched wider. "This ends tonight, soldier," he growled. Thomas leveled his rifle. The world seemed to fall silent, the battlefield pausing between one heartbeat and the next. Their eyes locked. The true battle had begun. The ranch yard was hell. Smoke rose from burning posts, horses screamed in panic, men shouted and cursed. Gunfire cracked, steel clashed, the ground itself trembling beneath the storm. Yet in the center, two figures faced each other, as if the world had shrunk to a circle of dust. Thomas Hale, rifle steady, eyes cold as stone. Zeke Barnes, pistol gleaming, sneer wide, knife flashing in his left hand. "You think you're a hero, soldier?" Zeke spat, circling like a wolf. "Cain's debt is mine to collect. And you," he raised the pistol, "you're just another dead man buying dirt." The shot came quick. Thomas rolled, the bullet grazing his shoulder, hot pain tearing across his flesh. He grit his teeth, fired back, his own shot striking Zeke's pistol, spinning it from his hand. Zeke roared and lunged with the knife. The two men crashed into the dirt, grappling, choking in dust and smoke. Thomas's hands, calloused from war and cattle alike, gripped the outlaw's wrist, fighting to keep the blade from plunging down. Muscles strained, veins bulged. The knife trembled inches from his throat. For a moment, the world faded, the screams, the fire, the chaos all gone. Only the weight of war again, one man against another, life and death on the edge of steel. Then Sarah's voice tore through the storm. "Thomas?" He shoved with all his strength, rolling, the knife slashing across his side but missing the heart. Zeke staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his beard, eyes blazing with hate. Before he could strike again, Rose came from the side, swinging her hammer. The blow missed his skull by inches, smashing the dirt instead. Zeke snarled, backhanding her to the ground. Clara fired, the shot grazing his leg. He stumbled, rage twisting his face. "Stay down, you filthy squaws." Anna raised the shotgun, hand shaking, but Thomas lifted his hand. "No." With a roar, Thomas charged. He slammed into Zeke, driving him into the charred post of the gallows. The wood cracked. Zeke gasped, knife dropping from his hand. Thomas pressed his rifle barrel against the outlaw's chest. The yard fell silent. Smoke drifted. The women stood frozen. Zeke's eyes darted, wild, spitting blood. "Do it. Kill me. That's all you know, soldier." Thomas's finger tightened on the trigger. Memories surged, men bleeding in the fields, the screams of war, the endless graves. He had sworn never again. Yet here stood the man who would burn them all. Behind him, Mary's voice whispered, trembling but clear, "If we kill him, we are no better." Sarah growled, "And if we don't, he'll be back." The world hung in that moment, a knife edge between mercy and vengeance. Thomas's chest heaved, his eyes burned. Then, slowly, he lowered the rifle. He stepped back. Zeke collapsed to the dirt, gasping. Thomas's voice came rough, steady as stone. "Run, Barnes. Run and tell the rest. If you ever set foot here again, this land will be your grave." The outlaw's eyes burned with hate, but fear too. He scrambled to his feet, staggered to his horse, and mounted with a snarl. The surviving riders, broken and bloodied, followed. Soon the dust swallowed them, their hoofbeats fading into the night. Silence returned. The fire crackled low. The 5 women stood tall, bruised and scarred, but alive. Thomas lowered his rifle, his body shaking with pain and exhaustion. The duel was done. But the war for this land had only begun. The ranch yard lay in ruins. Blackened earth smoked where fire had licked the ground. Broken weapons, spent cartridges, and the bodies of men and horses lay scattered in the dust. But the gallows, the symbol of Cain's cruelty, now leaned cracked and useless, its beams split during the fight. Dawn came soft, spilling gold across the horizon. Thomas stood in the yard, bandage tied tight around his side, watching the light creep over the wreckage. He had seen mornings like this before after Shiloh, after Gettysburg, when the sun rose over a field of silence, pretending life could go on. But this dawn felt different. Not an ending, a beginning. The women moved quietly through the yard. Sarah led the grim work of burying the dead, her jaw set like stone. She spoke little, but her every movement was steady, as if each shovelful of dirt was a declaration. We survived. Anna fetched water again and again, her slight frame bending beneath the weight. She trembled, but she never stopped. When Thomas offered to take the bucket, she met his eyes and whispered, "I can do it." This time, he didn't argue. Rose cursed as she dragged broken fence posts into a pile, her bruised arm bound tight. Yet when Clara teased her about falling during the fight, Rose laughed loud and rough, a sound that rang over the ruins like defiance. Mary moved among them with quiet hands, tending cuts, binding wounds, wiping blood from skin with cloth dipped in cool water. She hummed an old Apache melody as she worked, low and soothing, a song that turned the wreck into something almost sacred. Clara sketched in the dirt with a stick, mapping the ranch with quick marks. "Here, we'll reinforce the fence. Here, dig another ditch. And here," she circled the cabin, "a watch post." Her clever eyes darted to Thomas. "If they come again, we'll be ready." By noon, the worst was cleaned. The dead lay buried beneath mounds of earth, the crosses crude but upright. Smoke rose from the chimney once more. The ranch, scarred but breathing, stood. That evening, they gathered inside the cabin. Bread, water, and a few strips of dried meat were set on the table. It was a poor meal, but none complained. For the first time, laughter joined the clatter of bowls. Sarah smirked when Rose spilled her drink. Anna's quiet smile warmed the room. Clara's clever jokes lightened the air, and Mary's soft voice gave thanks in her language. Thomas watched them, his chest heavy. He had bought this land thinking it was only dirt and wood, but tonight he saw what it had become. A bond forged in fire, stronger than the iron of Cain's lies. When the meal was done, he spoke, voice low but clear. "This ranch isn't mine alone. It belongs to all of us. If we stay together. If we fight together. Whatever comes, we face it as one." Sarah's storm-gray eyes met his. She gave a sharp nod. Rose grinned, Anna whispered yes. Clara tapped the table like sealing a pact, and Mary whispered a prayer of thanks. Silence followed, not of fear but of certainty. Later, when the fire burned low, Thomas sat alone with the ledger Cain had left behind. The numbers bled across the pages, a mountain of debt scrawled in Cain's hand but now in his name. He closed the book with a heavy breath. They had won a battle, but the war Cain's betrayal, the noose of debt, the lawless men of the frontier, that storm was still coming. He looked out the window. The prairie stretched endless and unforgiving. But for the first time in years, Thomas Hale felt he would not face it alone. 3 weeks after the battle, the ranch no longer smelled of smoke, but of fresh-cut timber and turned earth. Every day began before sunrise. Thomas rose with the first light, setting his worn hat against the sun. By his side, the women worked with a rhythm born of both desperation and defiance. Sarah led in the fields, muscles straining as she drove the plow through the hardened soil. Her voice barked orders like a seasoned foreman, but there was pride in her tone too. She had survived the noose, and now each furrow was a victory. Anna carried water from the well, her slight figure bent but unbroken. The others teased her for being fragile, but her stubborn resolve made her stronger than anyone gave credit for. Rose hauled timber for the new fence, Her laugh echoed across the yard as she lifted beams two men together would have struggled with. When she hammered posts into the ground, sparks of joy lit her face, the joy of building instead of breaking. Mary tended to the livestock. They managed to gather 2 cows, 3 calves, and a scattering of chickens bought cheap from passing traders. Her gentle hand soothed both beast and human alike, her soft voice humming songs that turned the rough ranch into something closer to home. Clara's clever eyes caught details others missed. She measured the fields, marked the fences, checked the irrigation ditches. At night, she spread her sketches across the table, explaining how water should flow, where crops would take root, where defense could be strongest. Thomas oversaw it all, but he was no longer simply the lone cattleman. He was part of something larger. The women, once shadows dangling from ropes, now stood as his equals, partners in labor, comrades in survival. One blazing morning, Thomas saddled his horse. "The ledger won't pay itself," he muttered, stuffing a sack of corn and a bundle of hides into the saddlebag. Sarah tightened the straps without being asked. "You'll need more than words, Hale," she warned. He rode to the border market, dust clinging to his clothes, his horse weary but steady. The market bustled with traders, men who had known Samuel Kane's lies too well. Their eyes narrowed when they saw Thomas approach, some reaching for weapons. Thomas dismounted slowly, his voice carrying firm and honest. "Kane ran, but I stayed. This land will bear fruit again. I'll pay every cent he owed, but I'll need time." The crowd muttered. Some scoffed. But one old trader with a silver beard stepped forward, studying Thomas's face. He saw the scars, the weary eyes of a man who had carried war and loss. After a long silence, he gave a slow nod. "You've got 3 months, Creed," he said. "Fail, and the land is ours." Thomas met his gaze and nodded. 3 months is all I ask." He rode back that evening, the sun bleeding into the horizon. When he told the women, the cabin grew quiet. Then Sarah broke the silence with a sharp grin. 3 months? Then we'll make it bloom." Rose raised her hammer high. "We'll work till our hands break if we have to." Mary whispered a prayer. Anna bit her lip, but nodded. Clara tapped her sketches, already marking plans. They stepped outside together. Across the cracked earth, rows of green shoots had begun to push through the soil. Fragile, faint, but alive. For the first time since Kane's betrayal, hope had taken root. The prairie had changed. Where once dust and dead grass stretched endless, now rows of young corn reached for the sky, green against the red earth. The fences stood straight, the irrigation ditches shimmered with trickling water, and cattle bellowed from pens rebuilt with care. 3 months had passed since the night of blood and fire. Thomas stood at the edge of the field, sweat dripping from his brow, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself a small smile. This land was no longer a trap Kane had left behind. It was alive. The women worked tirelessly beside him. Sarah swung her sickle through tall stalks, her powerful frame cutting rows with steady rhythm. Rose hauled bushels of corn onto wagons, laughing as if the weight were nothing. Anna sorted grain with quiet diligence, her thin hands quick and careful. Mary tended the livestock, feeding calves and gathering eggs, humming her songs into the evening air. Clara directed the work, her sharp eyes catching every detail: where to stack, when to haul, how to store. Together, they moved like parts of a whole, each role vital. No longer 5 broken survivors and 1 tired cattleman, but something greater, a family forged by hardship. When the wagons were full, Thomas hitched the horses. This time, he did not ride alone. Sarah and Clara joined him, while the others guarded the ranch. The road to the border market felt shorter now, though the sun beat just as hot. The traders greeted them with suspicion, but when Thomas opened the sacks and the golden corn spilled out, silence fell. The crops were real, the fruit of honest labor. He set the first bag on the table. "Payment," he said. "Not all of it, but proof this land can stand." The silver-bearded traders studied the corn, then Thomas, then Sarah and Clara, standing firm at his side. Slowly, the old man nodded. "Half the debt cleared, the rest in due time. You've done what Cain never could. You brought life out of dirt." The murmurs of the market shifted from doubt to reluctant respect. For the first time, they were not seen as Cain's leftovers, but as builders of something new. That night, back at the ranch, they lit a fire inside the cabin. Around the flames, the six of them sat in weary silence, bread and roasted corn their only feast. But there was warmth, laughter, even song. Rose's booming laugh clashed with Clara's sharp wit. Anna shyly told a story from her childhood. Mary's voice carried an old prayer in her tongue, and Sarah leaned back with quiet pride. Thomas looked at them, the firelight dancing across their faces. His voice came low, rough with emotion. I thought I bought land. Instead, I found people. A reason to fight again. A reason to stay alive. Sarah's storm-gray eyes softened. You didn't just save us from the rope, Thomas. You gave us back our names. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Rose lifted her cup, chipped but steady. To the ranch, she declared. And to us. They raised their cups together. Outside, the prairie wind howled, but no longer like a threat, more like a song carrying across endless fields. The debt ledger still sat heavy on the table, half the numbers yet unpaid. Trouble would surely come again. The West was never kind. But as dawn stretched gold across the land, Thomas Hale knew this truth. Whatever storms came, they would face them not as strangers or survivors, but as a family bound by fire, by rope, and by the choice to endure. And for the first time in a long time, hope felt stronger than fear.